Now, originally, when the officers were planning this seminar, I think they were expecting about 50 people, so we called it a seminar. So far, 450 have registered. And the whole purpose of today was to try and keep it as informal as possible so that you'll be allowed to ask as many questions as possible within the hour. So what I'm going to try and do is introduce the panel, give them some warm-up questions to deal with, and then leave it open to yourselves to ask the kind of questions that you want to, bearing in mind that we have to finish, I'm told, 9 o'clock at the absolute latest to get the plenary session going. So I won't say any more, other than if we've had this response, 450, how important is connectivity to this agenda? And if every time I meet anybody or I meet ministers, they ask me, what are the big issues? Give me 2 issues. And I don't have to dwell too long to tell you transport and transport and transport. So I hope today we have a lively discussion, informative discussion, and one that takes us a bit nearer to solving some of the massive problems we have with connectivity. So I'm going to do a Valdunican act. So I'm going to sit down and introduce the panel. Does that give my age away? I'm going to sit down, introduce the panel, and then ask them a very quick warm-up question. Then it's open to you. And needless to say, if we're trying to get as many questions as possible, then could you make your questions fairly brief, and I'll try and get the answers fairly brief as well. Okay, so we'll start off with introducing our first member of the panel. As some of you may know the panel, but our first member of the panel is John Dowie, who's in charge of the local transport department, directorate at the Department for Transport, and needless to say, John brings vast experience of other departments in. Next to him is Jim Steer, who I've worked with in the past, and he's been kind enough to help to sponsor this. And he is the director and founder of transport consultant Steer, Davis and Glebe. And I worked with Jim on the Northern Way many years ago, so he's very familiar with the issues in the north of England. And we have Brendan Dick, who's our member, is the managing director of BT Regions, and needless to say, broadband and IT are also a crucial part of this debate. And finally, some of you may know him, it's John Parkin at the far end, and as you know, he's chief executive of the Leeds Bradford International Airport. Okay, they're very quick introductions, and now I'm going to start asking each one of them a very quick question to warm you up, and then I'll be on the alert for follow-up questions from yourself. Okay, I'm going to go to John first, in that order. John, the coalition says it's committed to more localism in transport decisions. Tell us what you think it will mean actually for the LEPs.
Yeah. And you so diplomatically put it that I've been in many other departments.
Yes.
And I think that process has bred a degree of cynicism, if I may say, because too many times I've seen false starts, rhetoric not translated into action, and actually a lot of people probably in this hall's time wasted kind of running up a hill with nothing really at the top of it. I think this time is going to be different. Now, I know that's a worrying expression which often rebounds, but my sense from what I see within government is that there is a much clearer commitment to devolution, a much clearer commitment to central government losing power and influence as a consequence. So from your point of view, that's encouraging. But to bring that to fruition requires your efforts as well. Now, in terms of where transport stands, we are within days planning to begin our consultation on how to devolve what I call, in the bureaucratic world, local authority majors, which is our funding for large local authority schemes in English authorities outside London. We'll begin a consultation on how to pass that over with the minimum possible checks from the centre, which will be a major change from anything seen in several decades. The McNulty Review on Rail came forward with recommendations for looking at how devolution can contribute. The departments following that up expect more before the end of the year. And we'll need a conversation about the trunk road network and how that you can best work with that, it can best work with you. I expect that will be early next year. But if I could just add to that, Chair, in terms of the beginnings of our offer to you, I think there are some challenges for you as well, collectively, about tightening up your governance, how you make decisions, pulling together the very fragmented talent, resources, expertise you have within the city, the wider sub-region. You've got a lot of talent there, but it's spread over a lot of different bodies. How can you pull that together to be as efficient as possible in a world of spending cuts? So those are challenges for you. The other thing is devolution comes with a bit of a sting in the tail, because distributing money out means that you can no longer look to me to fund the big 200 million, 300 million project, because I don't or won't have any money. Your share under that, however it's divvied up, is bound to be less, insufficient to fund that big project. So I think it puts increased emphasis on you to look to your own resources to match, to build on the money I can pass out. And that is a really big challenge. So with devolution of business rates, looking at tax increment financing, I think there is the means being put into your hands to do that. And the very last thing, I just want to needle you a bit just to make sure you're awake, because I'm only partially awake, that Manchester is ahead of you.
Mm. That does needle, yeah.
You catch up on the buggers.
Yeah. Okay, that's an interesting challenge. Can I move on to Jim, who, as I referred to earlier, has done some really important work and excellent work on the Northern Way many years ago. What do you think, Jim, the key issues are for the LEP to address?
Thanks, Keith. Well, I mean, it's pretty obvious, really, isn't it? You listen to John, and the message is going to be about tight budgets. They may be moving to the city regions, which is fantastic, and that's the opportunity to grasp, but money is going to be limited. So the key is to prioritise, and Keith, you kindly mentioned work we did together on Northern Way. That work led to identifying the single best transport project for the whole of the North. And that's quite a challenge to get people's minds around that. But if that work hadn't been done, the Northern Rail Hub actually wouldn't be progressing. So you've got to be prepared to make the tough choices. You can throw away all the wish lists after this kind of, current round, I think you've got, of looking to the old way of doing things. Can I have my share, please? In this case, John, whoever it is. After that, it's going to be about what really are your priorities. And I think the point I would make is that the place not to start to answer that question is to think in terms of transport and solutions. The place to start is to think about the economic need. So in this case, for the city region of Leeds, what really do you want? And of course, what we know, and we have tremendous amount of evidence, but you'll keep wanting to build this evidence base, is that businesses want reliable journeys for their business needs, for the workforce. The people looking for jobs want access to jobs. There is no doubt in my mind how critical transport is to rebuilding an economy. But if anybody is in doubt, then we've got to regenerate the evidence. And that's the place to start, thinking about the outcomes we want for the economy, not a transport scheme, all that would be nice to have. That will follow if we've thought through the process properly. And I suppose it is worth saying that it's not just within the city region, although that's a very interesting question. What's the single best transport scheme for Leeds city region? But surely you're going to want to work with the adjoining city regions. There tends to be no natural owner of city region to city region links. I mean, the message even gets, down south that actually Sheffield Leeds is a very tricky journey. Who's going to own that? City regions working together.
Thanks very much, Jim. Brendan, this is a favourite of mine, because Because I remember many years, I'm sure we've heard this over many years, that actually IT is going to reduce the need, if not finish the need, to use transport. It's all going to be done. Do you remember that? I'm still waiting, by the way, as I jump on a train or a plane. Is that still an urban myth, or do you think it will change?
Well, it's interesting. I came down here by train last night very happily. It was on time, it was fantastic, and I was in London on Tuesday by train. So clearly I'm an example, and I live in Edinburgh, by the way, of someone who works in an IT industry and uses IT every day of my life, but still travels. So I think it's the mix has changed. So I think we're never going to hit the day, clearly, even for business where people don't travel. But I think it was a couple of years ago, Jim and I did some work together. I chaired a group under the Scottish Chambers of Commerce to make the case for high-speed rail. So there was me working in the IT industry, doing that, and actually working with colleagues of yours in the air industry as well, who see different pressures coming in. And they both matter. And if you look at the economic case for say, high-speed rail, I think that's been clearly articulated. I think there's still a lot of work to do linking that to the north of Britain cities, and I think that economic hub from, say, the central belt of Scotland down here is important, something we should be paying more attention to. But then you look at the use of IT in economic terms, and I would agree with Jim, bring it back to economics. If you look at there was a report McKinsey produced just in the spring of this year that shows that in mature countries like ours, that in the last 5 years, 21% of GDP growth has been down to the use of the internet, and we're only scratching the surface. So from the point of view of the city region here, we need to really invest in ICT and critically invest in how it's used, right? So you can have the stuff in the ground. It's a bit like building an airport with no aircraft, right? You need to have the transport taking place. But I think secondly, when you look at travel, if we can't travel and at the same time be online in all sorts of ways, then that becomes redundant time, whereas I think the aspiration we have, and I certainly use, is that when traveling, I'm working, and I think that's absolutely fundamental. And if you look at the investment going in from the industry into IT, it's based on a belief that we need it. I mean, we're investing $2.5 billion by 2015, which is a hell of a size of a number. So I think that relationship between city-region economies, who also need to look at this with the industry, and people like BT is fundamentally important. But what we also need to think about, I think, is how we use it. So we know it's important. All the evidence says that. All the evidence says that high-speed networks in communications, as well as high-speed networks in rail or air, are vital. But I was looking at the stats that came out last week from the Office of National Statistics, and in Yorks and Humber, if I can just use that measure, which is what they were talking about, nearly 20% of the population here, on the face of it, never have used the internet. Now, that's not radically different, same as Scotland, not radically different from many regions in England. It's 5% worse than the southeast of England. So we've got a situation where a significant part of our population bases in the north are not exploiting technology in a way that will bring them value, either in a business sense or even at a consumer level, where again evidence says that consumers who use the internet can save about 20 quid a month just in their, in what they're spending. So I think it's a mix. I think in business sense you can avoid a degree of travel, but nonetheless travel is necessary. And the key thing for me is when we do travel that we can be productive when we're doing it, which helps the economy.